Hey, I want to welcome everybody on this Thursday evening here in July to FPV's ongoing workshop series on personal finance and money management. Um, we've been having this ongoing series of personal finance workshops. Wow, gosh, even heading into 2 years now. We've been doing these on a regular, consistent basis, 2 times a month. And depending on the month, sometimes 3 times a month. Throughout COVID, during the pandemic, we shifted to an online model. And so we're using technology to meet virtually and continue to think smarter and use our money smarter and make good financial decisions and create better financial habits. And so this evening, we're going to be talking about the future of money. It's sort of an abstract kind of philosophical kind of idea and discussion that we're going to be addressing tonight, maybe a little less practical necessarily, but I think it's an important one to start really thinking about, especially as technology begins to shape how we use our money. And if you think about it, you in your own individual financial lives have probably been using money differently and in different forms and using less and less cash over time. And I think that's because we are in that sort of transitionary phase where technology is allowing us to make transactions, to make purchases, to pay our bills in such a way where we're moving towards potentially a system that does not need cash anymore. And so I bring this up to sort of talk about the changes that are occurring around us because, one, we might be aware of them, but maybe we haven't made those changes personally just yet. And number two, it's sort of like a wave. And as that wave gains momentum and gets bigger and bigger, we want to make sure that we're in front of it and that wave doesn't pass us by. And then we may end up sort of being in a situation where it's maybe difficult to manage our money better because we're behind that wave. We're behind the curve. So we all rely on money in our everyday lives. We're constantly using it. We're constantly thinking about it in order to care for ourselves, in order to take care of our families and our responsibilities. It's just a part of life. It's a part of daily living. And currency, right? Cash, money, is simply the system for trading that time, right? And being able to get the items and the services and the things that we need, right? And most people don't really even sort of question how money works and why we have it and why we have it in the forms that we do. So it's kind of easy to forget just how much our money usage has evolved over time. And I think tonight we're going to sort of see that within the last couple of decades, the way that we use money has changed sort of very rapidly since the early 1990s. And I think we're in the middle of this sort of phase where that momentum is is sort of pushing us forward, right? So I want you tonight to think about the last time you considered sort of the future of where our money is going. So tonight we're going to talk about the rise of electronic banking. We're going to talk about things like digital currencies and moving towards perhaps a cashless society. When is this going to happen? Who knows? But I think we're seeing the signs that it is definitely here. It is definitely on our horizon. And it's something that we're going to continue to see more of, right? Right now, for example, there is more than 3,000 digital currencies that are out there. So you've probably been hearing a lot about cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, all these different digital currencies. This is now that wave of the future. It's creating both opportunities out there, and it's also creating controversies because with anything new, we're figuring out ways of how best to use it and how to regulate it. So I think this is a good sort of point in the year for us to sort of think about where is the use of money going based on some of the signs that we've been seeing. So this may be sort of hard to see on the screen, but there on the left, if you really think about it, we sort of know that our country in and of itself is still a baby. It's still in its infancy. It hasn't been around for a long time. And certainly within the last 100 to 125 years, our money has evolved fairly rapidly. Because if you think about it, if you go back to the early 1900s, our money was based on what they called the gold standard, right? And that what gave our paper money value was the fact that it was backed by a certain amount of gold that was kept by the US government, the US Treasury, right? And you've probably heard the history of that at Fort Knox, there were certain amounts of gold that could then give paper money value. It was backed by something, right? And in the early 1900s, that sort of gold standard sort of changed, meaning that we then went from backing our money with gold to just assign gold, because we kept printing money and there's no way that we would have enough gold to equal the rate at sort of which we were printing money, right? And so in the late 30s and into the 40s and 50s, that gold standard changed, and we have what's called fiat money. Fiat meaning we just assign the value to a dollar bill, the value to a $20 bill. Can you believe it that in the 1950s, the first credit card, the idea of a credit card came about, even going back to the 50s, right? 1958, American Express released its first credit card. It wasn't even so long ago, 1995, that Wells Fargo, in terms of the development in which in how we use our money, came up with online banking. So I remember in 1992, I was a freshman in college, and that was when the internet came about. And I remember the internet coming to my college campus. So it makes sense that, around 95, Wells Fargo became the first bank to then have online banking, right? So we've actually, it sort of feels like we've had online banking only fairly recently, but it's been around for a little while, 1995. And think about this, we've been talking a lot recently, and you probably heard a lot recently in the news about these cryptocurrencies, about Bitcoin. Bitcoin's been around since 2009. This idea of using money differently and transacting with different kinds of currencies is not something new, right? And even in this last year, Bitcoin, it's become controversial because it's something that needs to be highly regulated, because people are investing in it. People are now purchasing things with Bitcoin. They're buying vehicles with Bitcoin. They're trading it, and they're using it for transactions, right? So now this is something that the government is saying, okay, if we're going to move to a system like this of cryptocurrencies, we have to have rules in place. We have to have policies in place. So I think the top three areas of money innovation that we continue to see, even in 2021, is one, definitely banking. And you probably felt this yourself, right? More and more of your banking is moving to online electronic banking, right? As of right now, 51% of Americans bank online, right? They make deposits, they make withdrawals, they do what they normally would have done by going into a physical bank location and working with a teller. They're doing that now online, right? So I'm sure you've even sort of felt it. I have to go less and less into an actual bank. I may have to go to an ATM, if I have to get cash, right? But I can, from my home, I can deposit a check via my cell phone, right? I can move money between accounts. I can pay bills. I can transfer money to other people. I don't even have to go to the bank, right? Probably for some of you, it's been a long time since you actually physically wrote a check. People just don't carry checks with them anymore. That is becoming outdated, right? There's also another staggering figure about electronic banking. 51% of Americans currently use online banking in some way, shape, or form. But in a poll, 81% of Americans wanted to use online banking services even more than they currently do, even further, using other services. So that to me is a huge indicator that people just don't need to go into a physical location anymore, right? And banks love this because that means less costs for them. It means that they can run their banking business more efficiently without having to have physical locations, paying for real estate, paying for employees, all of those costs, right? So in streamlining the way that we use money, it's changing the way that we're banking, right? So that's how we sort of feel things on a day-to-day basis. If you are an investor or you've been learning about investing, one of the big changes that technology is bringing us is the idea of using technology and computers to make smarter investments, right? So typically in the past, you would go to a financial advisor, you would go to a financial planner, and you would work with somebody who knows the stock market, who knows good investments, who would know how to match investments with what you're trying to achieve. Now, that is being replaced with technological know-how and technological information. So, for example, if you have no idea what you want to invest in, you could use an online investing website or platform, answer a couple of questions about what you're looking to achieve, and the computer's algorithm could then figure out possibly a good investment option for you. So that technology is getting smarter and smarter and smarter, right? And then the other area where we're seeing money innovation is in e-commerce. I think we all have multiple digital ways to buy something or pay for something or pay somebody else for a service, right? You might have one of these, or you maybe have all of them. Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, Square, all of these different ways, Apple Pay, right? For us to buy the things that we need and the services that we need to get and just electronically transfer money without having to pass cash or checks hand to hand, right? Those are the three big areas of money innovation. But as we move forward, I want to even get sort of even more specific about how things are going to change and sort of what we're going to see. I think the first trend is that we're going to see a lot more in terms of digital banking. That's going to become the norm. Look what happened during COVID, right? In the wake of COVID, in-person banking, that completely diminished. And we saw that, okay, it's actually online is efficient. It's better serving my needs. I can get what I need to get done. And now it's safe enough. We've reduced the risk of banking online. Things are highly protected, right? Of course, I still have to be careful, but I can still get what I need to get done in terms of my digital banking. I can do that online, okay? During COVID, everything sort of became contactless and sort of automated. And I think that's going to be increasing at an even faster pace. It just makes sense that the future of money will continue to go in that direction. Experts are predicting that more banks will end up going completely digital, right? So there are some banks, not the big four, Wells Fargo, B of A, Chase, Citibank, and so on. I think those are always going to have some physical locations. You're always going to find their ATMs. There's a lot of banks, though, where they don't even have a physical location. They are completely online. Digital banking, we're seeing, is a win-win, right? It helps you cut down on the time and the effort and the hassle of having to make transactions by going into the bank, right? And like I mentioned before, banks are saving money on office space, a location, right? And by putting all their transactions online, they need less employees, right? And now with so many different personal finance and banking apps that you can have on your phone to track your money, all of those apps are syncing up digitally with where you bank. So really, there's no reason for us to go in unless you have some sort of kind of specialty transaction that you need. For example, maybe you need a cashier's check, right? That's not going to be possible online. Maybe it's something very specific. But for the most part, probably 95% of the daily transactions or business that we need to do in terms of our banking can be done online. I think trend number 2, right, we talked about here is we're going to start relying on this technology to make better investments, right? Our computing abilities are getting smarter, right? They call it AI, artificial intelligence based investing, is creating robo-advisors. So not a human financial advisor, but robo-advisors, right? That it's math that we're programming these robo-advisors with to have knowledge of the market, right? And it is lowering the cost of investing. When you use a financial advisor or a financial planner, there could be extra layers of costs involved because you're paying for that information, you're paying for that knowledge, you're paying for that sort of wisdom, if you will, right? But robo-advisors, the technology is lowering the costs of getting that information. So I think that that's going to become more popular with new investors. It's going to create low barrier of entry to investing. So a lot of times people are afraid of investing because they don't really know what they're doing. And so they go, gosh, I just don't have the time to learn it. I don't have the time to watch the market. And I don't have enough money to pay somebody else to help me with it. Well, robo-advisors are that solution. Obviously, robo-advisors and this robot, if you will, are not 100% guarantee that you're going to make money and you're going to be able to grow your money. With the market, there's risk of anything happening, regardless of if it's a computer that's giving you advice. But I think we're going to see a lot more of that online, that the way to invest is through robo-advisors online. Third trend is, and I've seen this a lot within the last year, is that I think cryptocurrencies are going to go mainstream, right? So it's not going to be something that we're sort of experimenting with or dabbling with. Even though Bitcoin, for example, has been around since 2009, and it's sort of been a global phenomenon, for almost 2 decades now. We have the technology to use these cryptocurrencies now more safely and securely without being hacked, without having issues. So now I think the next hurdle is just government regulation, right? We've seen that cryptocurrencies have skyrocketed in value, but then they also drop in value. So they're still very volatile. So the government is really figuring out, how do we monitor, supervise these different currencies? Because it's not our main currency yet, right? So I think the world is trying to figure out how to move forward with that. And also, how does it become a global sort of currency, right? How do major banks deal with it? How would other governments deal with it? But like I said, in the last year, I've seen this really become popular because we see very, very big companies making big investments in Bitcoin because they know that this is going to be the future, right? So for example, Tesla, Elon Musk was buying huge amounts of Bitcoin. You can now buy vehicles with Bitcoin. Like, it is becoming more commonplace to now see this kind of currency being used, and it's not just some sort of fringe on the side kind of investment idea. It's becoming more and more and more popular, and we're looking for more ways to implement it. So I think that's the third trend that we're definitely going to see continue to move forward. Trend number 4 is, as this cryptocurrency gains momentum, I think we're going to even see other countries move towards being a cashless society. I saw a statistic that by 2025, it is predicted that almost 70% of nations around the world could potentially sort of move to being a cashless society. Wow. So that's a majority of the globe being able to deal in commerce and business without transacting cash, right? It's going to just be all digital. So many countries are moving in the direction of digital payments, right? It does sound sort of very futuristic and sort of, I don't know, like watching the Jetsons. When you think about a world without physical money. But with this momentum, like if you think about it, if you have Apple Pay, right, even on your phone, you scan your phone. You have a watch that can have Apple Pay. You can just scan your watch and you can pay for something. That sort of future that we had envisioned 20, 30, 50 years ago, I mean, that's here. We're doing it, right? And so the pace at which we're progressing is really speeding up, right? So these things don't sound that so far off anymore. But again, we're having to work through privacy issues. We're having to work through security issues. For example, this was an amazing example to me, which I did not realize. Sweden, for example, their country's commerce, 98% of their transactions are done digitally in Sweden. So it's not just the US who's moving in this progressive direction, but there's also these other European countries in the world who are doing this as well, right? So I just think capitalism in general throughout the world is moving to just being cashless, especially when we see countries doing 98% of their business digitally, right? And maybe some of you who work in the business world are seeing this as well, especially in your own jobs, the way that you do your job. Yeah, we're just moving in that direction. I just don't think we have to carry physical cash anymore. Now, there are some times when I do just want to transact in cash, but that's becoming sort of few and far between. Trend number 5. The way that we manage our money is also going to change, right? Because now that we're transacting things digitally and sort of more on a global scale, we can actually be sort of more purposeful in the way that we use our technology. So it's actually giving us as the consumers more power, right, to not just manage our money, but more power to determine how we manage our money. So let me give you an example of this. When we bank at a large bank, those banks take our money and invest them in order to make more money, right? So while our money is in safekeeping at the bank, they're borrowing our money to generate more money for themselves, right? And oftentimes those banks use investments that maybe perhaps you wouldn't agree with, that wouldn't align with your values. And now, because we're transacting digitally and we have this power through technology, we can be, I guess, more discriminating as consumers to determine who is the bank or who is the entity that's going to be able to use my money. And if that bank is trying to make money off of my money by investing in things that I don't agree with or things that I don't support, I could just go somewhere else. Whereas before, earlier in our history, we were sort of stuck, right? As consumers, we could only choose certain banks because they were the biggest ones. They were the safest ones. And we didn't really have a choice, but now we have more options. So I think that our money management is going to sort of align better with our goals. And I could say, you know what? I'm going to take my money elsewhere. And I'm going to do my banking with a different organization. Because now I have the technology and the power to make those kinds of choices. Whereas before, changing a bank was painful, right? If you had banked with a certain bank for 10 years, 15, 20 years, you just sort of stayed put because it was painful to try to go to another bank, open an account, transfer your money. Like, it was a process. And so a lot of times as consumers, we just sort of put up with kind of what we had. That's going to no longer be the case because it's going to be so much easier digitally to just move, right? And to just change things up. So we're going to be able to sort of get behind the causes that are most important to us, whether it's social inequality, whether it's fighting sort of political corruption or climate change or whatever, not only in the banks that we choose, but in the businesses that we choose to transact with and buy things from. So actually, I think this trend is going to be very, very helpful for us because I think we're not only going to be better consumers, but we're also going to be able to be sort of smarter about how we use our money versus sort of just being stuck with what we got. So those are definitely the 5 trends that I'm seeing as a sort of byproduct of technology. I sort of want to open it up now to if you sort of felt this in your own situation. I'd love for you to be able to sort of share with the group on the call here on our Zoom call, sort of what you've experienced. And maybe you're sort of right now, you have one foot in both worlds. You're sort of doing some things old school and you're trying out some newer ways of banking. You know, you have one foot in the past and sort of one foot in the future, and how you're trying to juggle sort of moving into all these new technologies. Maybe there's some of you who might say, you know what, Brian, I'm still writing checks and I'm still balancing a checkbook. I'd love for you to be able to just share with the group sort of where you're at with things and how you're sort of managing, sort of riding this wave of technology. Maybe you've gone completely cashless. I'd love to hear about it. I think what you could do is you could either just speak up, or you could, I think you could raise your hand, and I think Lisa can see that.
Yeah, I don't see anything.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I wanted to ask you, how could you find out what institution is borrowing off your money and who are they, you know, borrowing it, like you said, for?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic question. So one of the things that you could immediately do is you could do a bit of Google research. So let's say, for example, I bank at Wells Fargo. You could go online and just do some Google research in terms of looking at who is Wells Fargo associated with. You may be able to find information in terms of sometimes these banks support certain political candidates. Sometimes they're affiliated with certain companies, right? You can find that out online. The other way too is each banking institution should have disclosures in terms of how they use your money. So it may be in the fine print, and I don't know if they would end up giving you a PDF that's like 300 pages long, but you should be able to ask your bank, you know, when my money is with you and you're paying me interest, how are you generating that interest? What are you investing in? Who are you investing in? They should be able to get you information or a response to that, right? That should be public knowledge. That should be public information. It's a matter of asking them about it.
Okay.
So it's not so much anymore, but let me give you a prime example. So for example, big tobacco, right? So oftentimes in the past, several decades ago, there would be mutual funds, right? An investment that is a collection of different companies. There would sometimes be tobacco companies as part of those mutual funds, and investors wouldn't know about it. So they would invest in a mutual fund and they would have no idea that a portion of their money was being invested in tobacco, right? And some people will say, well, I don't care. I don't care what it is as long as it makes me money, right? But then others of us might say, well, of course, I want to make money, but I don't want to be supporting things or causes that sort of go against my personal belief system, right? So mutual funds started becoming what they called socially responsible investments, right? Where you could get a mutual fund that did not invest in tobacco, had no political affiliations, things like that, right? And that created a trend where a lot of mutual funds started disclosing all of their investments and would also say, warning, basically, we invest in these 2 or 3 things that may be sort of socially questionable. And they would disclose that. So in the same way, banks will also be able to tell you how they're investing your money to build interest, to pay you that interest. So yeah, I would first Google, and then if you can't find any information there and you're sort of feeling like, gosh, I wonder what B of A is affiliated with, you may want to ask them for a disclosure.
Okay, because I bank with Chase, so I'm going to be doing that tonight because I'd really like to know what political affiliates they go for.
Yeah. So for example, I'm just gonna, I mean, and honestly, this could send you down a rabbit hole. But you should be able to Google Chase political affiliations, and you should be able to see, it should be public information. You should be able to see a list of contributions that, for example, JP Morgan Chase has made to certain political candidates.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you would have to look at multiple sources and sort of check your sources and so on, because there's also a lot of conspiracy sort of information out there. And that, but yeah, you should be able to see what congressional committees they're supporting. What are they lobbying for? Do they support, I don't know, oil drilling? A lot of that you can find.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Evelyn actually posted in the chat, I pay some of my bills online, but really do not like to, since there is a chance my information may be sold or stolen. Is there anything I can do to take my bank info and social more secure?
Oh yeah, yeah. Great, great question. It used to be, right, that you would never give your social unless you were filling out a job application, you were filling out a rental agreement, like an official sort of application or form. Now I sort of feel like we throw our social out all over the place. um, I can remember the days of, blacking out my social security number with a marker if I was going to send something through the mail because, you wouldn't want somebody to pick up your social security number. And now we kind of throw it out like breadcrumbs. It's just sort of all over the place. When it comes to paying bills online and protecting your social, here's one thing that you should do. If you haven't done so already, and this is a very simple thing, and I know it sounds silly, change your passwords. If you think about it, and if you're like me, as these password lengths evolve and I need more characters and numbers and all this sort of thing, what I've sort of locked into is, what is that one password that I go to meet every password requirement? And then I end up having the same password for every single login, right? Because I don't want to remember 30 different passwords, right? But one simple way to ongoingly protect yourself is to change your password on a regular basis. So if you have to change your bank account login info online, your password, let's just call it once a month. Do it on a regular basis. Even if you have to keep a physical notebook and you have to write this down, that's one very simple way. Because I know that a majority of us keep that same password and we reuse it and recycle it all over the place, right? There are now apps and there are sort of programs or software that remember your password and lock your password and keep it safe. And it will remember your password for every different login or sign in that you have. That's sort of the next level. If you don't want to write it all down and have to track that and remember it, you can get an app for your computer that will securely remember for every site that you have a login. And I don't mean just like, hey, my Apple computer remembers my passwords, because even that's not secure. But these are encrypted. This is encrypted software that even if you had to make 100 different passwords, it would remember it for your Wells account. It would remember it for your online bill pay. And you could have a different password. Then we would sort of get away from using that same password for everything. The second thing that you want to do is, when was the last time that you changed your PIN on your ATM card? That's another thing, right? So to keep yourself safe from fraudulent credit card readers at the gas station, at Walmart, wherever thieves are trying to put, these little chip readers into these machines, change your ATM PIN, right? So if you've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for months and months and months, go to your bank's ATM, you put in your card, and there should be an option to change your PIN, right? I know it's more hassle and you got to remember it and all that sort of thing. But I think just at a more often, that's sort of that first layer of security. The other thing that I do every time I make an online transaction, right, or I'm looking at my bank account on Wells Fargo, I always look up in the top left-hand corner of my browser to make sure that I see the lock, right? There's a little lock symbol or logo right next to the website address that also notifies me that this is not a publicly viewable site, meaning nobody is looking at what I'm typing in. right? Because sometimes, and this happens quite often, is that fictitious websites are created, basically clones of a B of A site, clones of a Wells Fargo site are created to hopefully snatch your login. So it looks like a Wells Fargo site, looks totally legit, has their logo, but I stumbled on this because I Googled it. I think it's my login. I go to log in, but it's not a secure site. It was something that somebody created to try to fool me. The other thing that I do is I also, on a regular basis, I will just scan through all of my purchases, just double checking, right? To see, did somebody make a charge that on there that I didn't know about, or that wasn't me, right? So I try to make it a regular habit. It's not every day. Maybe it's every week or 2 weeks. I will just sort of scan through and look to see, wait a second, I did not purchase something for $63 at Walmart. Then I asked my wife, was that you? Oh, it was her. Okay, good. Right. So even just a visual sort of review of your transactions is also helpful. Now, something else that a lot of banking institutions and even credit cards are using is they have features and benefits where if there seems to be an uncharacteristic charge or a withdrawal, or you're spending your money sort of out of the ordinary, it will alert you. It will notify you, right? Hey, you just spent $300. Was that you? Because you typically don't do something like that. So again, that AI, that artificial intelligence, that technology is becoming smarter and smarter. So they're seeing our spending habits. And when something is out of the ordinary, it will alert you. Hey, you just made a purchase in Florida. Wait a second, I'm not in Florida and I didn't buy something online, right? It can give us that sort of heads up. So if you have a bank that, or a credit card that can give you that notification and you're not using it, you may want to opt in for that, right? Hopefully it's not notifying you every single day that there may be something weird and you're just doing sort of your daily business. But I think that's another sort of added feature. Yeah, and that's the whole reason why so many of us would write checks. That was the reason why so many of us would use cash, is because it was a way to protect ourselves, right? But now it's become, I think with some of those simple procedures, it's become easier to protect yourself. And also, furthermore, a lot of the companies, whether it's credit card, banks, and so on, it's easier and easier to dispute theft, identity fraud, transactions that weren't yours. I think it's becoming more and more commonplace, and companies are realizing this, right? It used to be such a hassle to prove that it wasn't you, right? I remember the last time this happened to me, I called up Wells Fargo. I said, this was not my transaction. They said, okay, we'll review it. And in the meantime, we'll credit you the money. So they put it right back on in my account. And then they went through an investigation and figured it out, right? So it used to be that you would have to wait and wait and wait and wait. It was such a hassle until they figured out it wasn't you. But I think because we're transacting more digitally, I think companies know that in terms of customer service, if we file a complaint, they sort of have to take care of that, right? So we're always sort of being made whole quicker and quicker now. So that also sort of gives me hope that, yeah, there's always going to be people trying to hack stuff. There's always going to be people trying to, fraudulently scam us. I just got an email the other day saying that if I didn't call a certain number or I didn't log in at a certain website, that there was going to be a $6,000 charge on my account from Amazon. I know for certain that I was not buying something for $6,000 on Amazon, right? And I know my wife wasn't, right? So obviously an email like that is totally fraudulent. I see that the email comes from some random Gmail. So I know it's a scammer, right? It's not an official corporation. It's not a legitimate entity that's emailing me, right? I know they're just trying to, if they put out enough of those, they're going to get somebody who goes, oh my gosh, I don't want $6,000, withdrawn from my account. And they will call that number or they will try to log in. And that's when they give up their info. They got caught, right? It's targeted at seniors who are also unaware of how to use the technology. They just get a notification saying this is going to happen if they don't call. And so not knowing any better, they call and they give up their personal information. When scammers tried to say that they're the IRS, right? Maybe you've had one of these phone calls, right? Where they'll leave a message and saying, you have a huge IRS penalty. And unless you call this number, right, this penalty is going to be levied on you or whatever. The IRS does not communicate that way, right? But a lot of people fall for it because as soon as they hear the words IRS, they panic and they're like, I'm in trouble. So I think it's also too about sort of slowing down those moments and saying, okay, wait a second, this does not seem legit, right? So I think being vigilant and protecting yourself too. So that's a very long-winded way of sort of touching on all these things that we're experiencing. But I think there's some very basic things that you can do. Change your PIN, change your password. I know it can be a hassle because you might have, 20 different things that you got to change, but it's a very simple layer of protection that you can have for yourself. Yeah, that's a great question. In 2 weeks, oh, sorry.
There's another comment here.
Yeah.
So Erica's, she said, I am using Venmo, Apple Pay, Auto Bill Pay, etc., but I still have to write a paper check for rent. I prefer to be cashless, but at times I still find I need to have cash on hand.
Yep, absolutely. Great comment. And there are going to be certain things, I think for a while, that we're just going to need to have a good old check for. We're going to have any cash. But definitely there are these things, but I'm seeing it more and more that even landlords and property owners and apartment management and so on are taking payments via other digital mediums. So I know some people who pay their rent through Venmo to their landlord. I know some people who put their rent on their debit card, right? It is happening more and more, but yes, certainly we're not 100% of the way there. And, we're still going to have that box of checks for a while. Yeah, definitely. But for the most part, I think a lot of us are headed into trying to convert most of our business into doing things electronically. I remember, and I only started this recently, depositing checks on my cell phone, mobile deposit. I was sort of scared. I was like, how's this going to work? I'm just going to take a picture of this check and that's going to be good enough for them to deposit the funds into my account. It just seemed, I don't know. It just didn't seem like that would, I don't know. How does that work? But sure enough, the more I did it, the more comfortable I got with it. I've never had a problem with it. I've never had it not deposit the money. And trust me, I'm not a photographer and I've taken some horrible pictures of checks, but for some reason, it always goes through. So I think that's the other thing too, is the more comfortable we get sort of operating this way, I think the easier and easier it's going to be. And ultimately, yeah, I think big things like paying our rent on the monthly basis is probably going to go digital. But yeah, for the time being, there are those little stragglers that we're going to definitely have to use cash for. We're going to have to use checks for. For those of you that maybe even buy and sell online with a complete stranger, oftentimes cash is just sort of the best policy. If you're selling something and you want to transact with cash because you know it's cash, you know you'll get paid, there's less likelihood of it being fake money versus somebody trying to scam you digitally, right? So yeah, you may sell stuff and then just do cash only, because you don't want to mess with, trying to sync up technology with random strangers. So yeah, I think for a little while, we're gonna, in order to protect ourselves, we're gonna keep using some of those old ways. But yeah, certainly, yeah, that's where I feel like I'm at with it as well. Is sort of one foot in both worlds.
Brian, I have a question for you. Do you shred your checks after you after you take a picture of them and upload them, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Great.
Cool.
That's a great comment as well.
Right.
So I will say that I do keep them for a number of days, just in case there is an issue with the mobile deposit and it doesn't go through. And I'm like, hey, I sent that in and I don't see the deposit. I haven't had that yet. But just for security reasons, I keep the check just in case I have to prove to the bank. I have to walk in and physically show them that, yes, indeed, I had this check.
Yeah, I was a little hesitant as well, but I saw my husband do it last week and I was like, okay, I don't know what to do with the check. Should I save it or what do I do with it? Don't want to double deposit.
Yeah, no. What you should probably do before you shred them is just confirm that it's been deposited into your account.
Okay.
So typically, depending on where you bank, funds are available immediately, depending on the amount. Like for me, sometimes at Wells Fargo, they will deposit immediately only a portion of the check, and then the rest of the amount will hit maybe 2 days later or a day later, just depending. So I do keep those checks, until I know that the full amount shows up in my account.
All right, cool. I'll keep that in mind for the next time.
Yeah. So like I wouldn't right now take a picture of a check, mobile deposit, and then throw it in my shredder.
Okay.
I got to confirm that those funds are in my account.
Got it.
Yeah. No, that's a great comment.
Okay. So I guess if nobody else has any questions or comments, I guess that'll conclude tonight's workshop. And thank you all again for attending.
Yeah, our next one is going to be in 2 weeks, Thursday, August 5th at 6 p.m. 5 investment accounts you should know about. And then there's probably going to be something next week, right, Lisa?
Yes, definitely. So next week we're going to have, let me just double check the name one more time. I don't want to mess it up. International Rescue Committee. They're going to be presenting an informational session on citizenship for those who are not citizens yet. It would be a great opportunity for you guys to come on and just, listen to the information that they have and the services that they provide as well. And not to mention, it is the last eligible workshop to join in on if you guys want to receive, or, for those 2 lucky winners that want to receive the $100 discount for the month of August. So please RSVP by next Thursday at 1 p.m.
That's awesome.
Yes.
I hope you guys have a great weekend. Make sure you get to that workshop next week in order to get that $100 off your rent. That's fantastic. And then I'll see you guys in 2 weeks on August 5th. So I appreciate everybody being here. I appreciate your good questions and your good comments. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.